Hello everyone, we're into introduced species. This little clip is a very quick run through of biotic and abiotic, specifically about how introduced species can change those things, taking advantage of Australia's fragile conditions to form colonies. To be successful here today, I have the questions in class, but easy words here, biotic and abiotic, and explaining how with some examples of introduced species alter the abiotic characteristics and colonise environments here in Australia. So to start really quick here, we've got a picture of shellies. And to recap these words, biotic, bio meaning living, so biotic meaning the living parts of an ecosystem. On the other hand, we've got abiotic. A is not, so anything that's not biotic, so anything that was never living, the inorganic parts of the ecosystem. Using green, I am going to highlight biotic. And back to my picture here. Examples here are all of the plant vegetation. You've got the Norfolk pines we've spoken about up here, and any of the marine life we're looking at in the rock pool area and the lagoon here. There's a lot of seaweed in there. And then all of the humans down here, and their little dogs. Not allowed dogs on this beach, what are you doing? Maybe they're children, not sure. Abiotic, I'm going to use red. Abiotic are these non-living parts, so we've got the rocks here, and the rocks that go up into sea acres, and that weathers to form the soil. Also the water, the temperature of the water, and the weather. The climate, and that's to do with temperature. So a lot of these abiotic factors actually influence the living things, and vice versa. So often an ecosystem is where these two parts are balanced and they really rely on each other, biotic and abiotic. Changing colour, caring for the country has taught us a lot about the environmental concerns here. Water. We had environmental flows and damming. Erosion. Because a lot of the plants here hold the soil together because it's so poor. Salinity. Waste management. Now other countries have these problems too, but because Australia is so old, its soils are so fragile, and because it's been isolated in the middle of a plate, in the middle of an ocean, it hasn't had any of that flow of genes from other continents. So the ecosystems here are quite unique, they're very different to other countries, and that's why we have all the most dangerous things, because it's a hard place to live. All of this together means that Australia is uniquely vulnerable to change. So only a small change, for example, pulling out these trees with deep roots, the natives, and replacing that with crops, means that the water table is going to rise, bringing the salinity, and it means that the soil is not held together anymore. So we have this problem of erosion and salinity. This is old news. Today we're talking about how introduced species can cause a change that's negative for the Australian environment. And we come back to our example, Salvinia, specifically how it has a bad, sad face, effect on the abiotic characteristics of an environment. Here's a picture of a man in waders, and he's out getting all the Salvinia in the water. In a moment, pause the video and have a think about how many abiotic things you can see in this picture. Alright, here's a few I came up with. Looking at the rocks and the minerals that make up the soil underneath here, that all to do with the permeability of the underlying rock. You've got sunlight, which is the temperature. Coming back to weather, realistically we're talking about long-term weather, climate. Here the water, so talking about the temperature, the salinity, the flow rate, all of this stuff, and specifically when we put this picture back out here, how is the Salvinia affecting all that stuff? Well, it grows in this giant mat, and that's covering the surface of the water. So straight away, the temperature of the water is going to drop because it's not getting as much sunlight. The flow rate is probably going to be slower as well because all of the weeds are slowing it down. Not to mention the fact that this is a huge mat of a living organism, which means it's going to be using up oxygen. And if it's using up the oxygen in the water, that's something inorganic, abiotic, that the fish aren't able to get to. In summary, by the way that Salvinia grows, by covering the whole surface of the water, it really affects a lot of the abiotic characteristics there. And for an example with animals, we've got brumbies up in the Snowy Mountains in Kosciuszko National Park. Now brumbies are introduced and they've gone wild up there, they've gone feral, and one of the big negatives is that they have hooves. And that means they're walking around everywhere, compacting the soil. Soil compaction will lead to loss of vegetation, and that will lead to increased levels of erosion. Because we're talking about soil compactability and therefore water penetration, these are all abiotic characteristics the brumbies are really having a negative effect on up in the Snowy Mountains. So another quick and really easy example there. And that's that, boys and girls. To be successful here, you need to be able to describe biotic and abiotic, as being the living and the non-living parts of the environment, and explain how some, with specific examples, introduced species alter named abiotic characteristics, and how that lets them set up colonies here. Example, Salvinia covering the whole surface of the water, or brumbies in herds taking over the highlands in Australia and the Snowy Mountains. We'll have questions for that in class. Make your notes now and make sure that they address these 2 points here. Good job all. See you soon.